The town of Cedar Brook was the kind of place where everyone knew your business. It had a main street with old-fashioned lampposts. A diner that served pie, everyone argued, was the best in the county. And a shared history that wrapped around the community like a warm, if sometimes tight, blanket. So, when Leo Vance lost his wife Claire, the town felt the loss deeply. They brought casseroles that filled his refrigerator, mowed his lawn without being asked, and smiled at him with eyes full of a pity that was meant to be kind, but only made the hole in his chest feel bigger. Leo was a carpenter, a man who used to fill their houses with the smell of sawdust and the sound of his easy laughter. Now, he moved through his own home like a ghost, touching the back of a chair Claire had painted, or staring at the sink where she'd left a coffee cup, still unwashed. His hands, skilled at shaping wood, felt useless. But his pain was a quiet, adult thing. He could still go to the grocery store, still nod and say, "I'm managing, thanks." The real, silent earthquake had happened inside his 7-year-old son, Sam. Before, Sam had been a chatterbox, full of questions about why the sky was blue and where the clouds went at night. He'd had his mother's bright eyes and a laugh that came easily. After the funeral, that boy vanished. It was as if a switch had been flipped. He stopped talking, not to his father, not to his teachers, not to his best friend from down the street who came over with a new video game. He would eat, sleep, and sometimes draw in a notebook with furious concentration. But his world had shrunk to a soundless bubble. The doctors called it traumatic mutism. The people in town, whispering over their coffee, called it a heartbreaking shame. They'd see Leo at the hardware store, Sam's small hand clamped in his, the boy's eyes fixed on the floor, and their hearts would ache. "That poor man," they'd say. And that poor, silent boy. On the other side of town, where the paved roads gave way to gravel and the houses sat farther apart, there was another kind of silence. It lived in a small, slightly run-down cottage surrounded by a wild, tangled garden. This was where Alara lived. If the town wrapped itself in a blanket of shared history, Alara was a loose thread they'd all agreed to ignore. Years ago, she had been one of them. A beloved schoolteacher, in fact. She had a way of making children feel seen. Then came the trouble with the school's fundraising money. A significant amount had gone missing. The investigation was a fog of whispers and sideways glances. No charges were ever filed against Alara. There was never any real proof, but the cloud of suspicion never lifted. A story took root, one that suggested she'd made a bad mistake, a moment of weakness. To protect the school's reputation and the memory of a well-liked principal who had since passed, a quiet agreement was made. Alara resigned. The town, deciding it was easier to blame one person than face a messy truth, let her become the story. They didn't hate her. They shunned her. It was a polite, practiced avoidance. They crossed the street when they saw her, gave tight smiles at the post office, and spoke of her in the past tense. Now, Alara lived with her plants. Her garden was not the neat, orderly kind the garden club admired. It was a joyful, messy explosion of life. Sunflowers stood tall next to sprawling tomato vines, herbs mingled with flowers, and butterflies drifted over it all. It was her only conversation. Her hands in the dirt were her language. The town saw a lonely, strange woman. They didn't see the person who found more honesty in the silence of growing things than in the whispered words of people. The two stories of Cedar, Brook the tragic widower and his silent son, and the shunned woman on the edge of town ran on parallel tracks that never seemed destined to meet. Leo's world was filled with too much absence, Alara's with too much forced solitude. Sam lived in a glass box of his own making, and the town, for all its good intentions, only reinforced the walls by treating both him and Alara as problems to be pitied or avoided. Leo knew he had to do something, anything, to try and reach his son. One Saturday, his voice falsely cheerful, he said, "How about we get out of the house, buddy? I got us a plot in the old community garden. We can grow something." Sam didn't react, just continued drawing a single looping line on his paper. But he let Leo put his jacket on him. The community garden was a patchwork quilt of neat squares on the sunniest side of town. But the plot Leo had been given was the worst one, right at the back, up against a rusty old fence and choked with weeds. It was next to the property line that separated the tidy town plots from the wild, creeping green of Alara's land. As Leo started pulling weeds, his back already aching, Sam stood statue still, watching a ladybug climb a blade of grass. Leo felt a fresh wave of despair. This was a mistake. He was just moving their sadness from one place to another. He didn't notice the figure on the other side of the fence, partially hidden by a huge leafy rhubarb plant. Alara had seen them arrive. She saw the man's slumped shoulders and the boy's empty stare. She recognized the weight they carried. It was a familiar language. For a long moment, she simply watched, her own heart long hardened against the town, giving a soft, unexpected pang. Then she went back to her work, sinking her fingers into the dark, warm earth, thinking of nothing but the plants and the quiet. The following Saturday, Leo found himself driving back to the community garden. He didn't really want to go. The sight of that weedy, hopeless plot made him feel tired before he even started. But he had made a promise to himself and to Sam's therapist to try new things, to create routines. He glanced in the rearview mirror at his son. Sam was looking out the window, his expression unreadable. He hadn't fought coming, which Leo took as a small victory. The garden was busier today. A few people were tending to their neat rows of lettuce and beans. Leo got the usual nods, the soft smiles that quickly dropped when people saw Sam's withdrawn face. He felt their eyes on his back as he walked Sam to the far end, toward their lonely patch. It was a relief to be away from the quiet scrutiny. He set to work with a rake, attacking the thickest clump of weeds. Sam, as usual, stood nearby. But he wasn't just standing. Leo noticed his son's head was tilted, listening. Then Leo heard it too, a soft, rhythmic sound coming from the other side of the weathered wooden fence. Snip, snip, snip. It was the sound of pruning shears. Someone was working in the jungle next door. Leo paid it no mind and kept working. His hands were soon dirty, his forehead damp with sweat. He lost himself in the physical effort, a brief escape from his thoughts. It was only when he straightened up to stretch his back that he realized Sam was no longer next to him. A jolt of pure panic shot through him. "Sam?" His voice was sharper than he intended. No answer. He spun around, his heart hammering against his ribs. The garden plots were open. He could see Sam wasn't there. "Sam!" He called again, louder this time, his fear rising like a tide. Then he saw it. A small gap in the fence, near the ground, where a few boards had broken away. Just big enough for a curious child to squeeze through. Leo dropped his rake and practically ran to the hole, dropping to his knees to peer through. The sight on the other side stole the breath from his lungs. Sam was standing in the middle of what looked like a secret kingdom. Flowers exploded everywhere in bursts of color he didn't even have names for. The air smelled sweet and green. And there, a few feet from his son, was a woman. She was kneeling on a worn-out cushion, her hands covered in garden gloves. She wasn't looking at Sam. She was looking at something on the leaf of a tall plant, her focus complete. Very slowly, she raised a finger, not pointing at Sam, but at the leaf. Sam took a small, hesitant step closer. Leo watched, frozen, as his son leaned in to see what she was seeing. It was a fat, bright green caterpillar, slowly inching its way along. The woman didn't say a word. She simply watched the caterpillar, and Sam watched it with her. For a full minute, the only sounds were the buzz of a bee and the distant chatter from the main garden. There was no pressure, no expectation. She was just sharing a quiet moment with a bug, and somehow Sam had been invited and Leo finally remembered how to move. He scrambled up, his mind racing. He had to get his son. This was the woman everyone talked about, the one you were supposed to avoid. What was he supposed to do? He hurried around the perimeter of the fence until he found a proper gate. It was leaning open. "Hello?" He called out, trying to keep his voice calm. "I'm sorry, my son. He just wandered in." The woman looked up. Her face was older than he'd expected, lined from the sun, but her eyes were a clear, calm gray. She looked at Leo, then back at Sam, who had finally turned at the sound of his father's voice. "It's all right," she said. Her voice was low and quiet, like it wasn't used much. "He's just looking." She gave Sam a small, brief smile that didn't demand anything back, and then she went back to her weeding. As if a strange man and a silent boy in her garden were the most normal thing in the world, Leo walked over to Sam and put a hand on his shoulder. "Come on, buddy. We shouldn't be in here. We need to let the lady garden in peace." Sam didn't resist. He let Leo guide him back toward the gate. But as they left, Leo saw his son glance back over his shoulder, not at him, but at the woman and her green world. The next week, the routine was the same. Leo worked his plot. Sam stood nearby. But now, Leo noticed Sam's attention was often on the fence, listening for the snip, 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 or the gentle rustle of plants from the other side. Leo felt a complicated mix of things. Worry, of course, curiosity, and a strange little spark of something that felt like hope, which was so foreign he almost didn't recognize it. On the third visit, it happened. Leo was struggling to loosen a stubborn, deep-rooted weed. He was yanking at it, grunting with the effort, when he heard the soft crunch of footsteps on the other side of the fence. He looked up. The woman was there, standing at the gap in the boards. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at Sam. In her hands, she held a single perfect sunflower. Its head was as big as a dinner plate, a burst of cheerful yellow. She didn't come through the fence. She didn't say a word. She simply held the flower out, offering it through the broken space. Sam stared at it. He looked at his father, then back at the sunflower. Slowly, so slowly, he walked over to the fence. He reached out his small, dirty hand and took the thick stem from her. "Thank you," Leo said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. The woman just nodded once, her eyes soft on Sam's face as he studied the sunflower's dark center. Then she turned and disappeared back into her green maze. That evening, the sunflower sat in a jar of water in the middle of their kitchen table. It was the brightest thing in the whole house. Sam didn't talk about it. He didn't need to. For the first time in months, he had brought something new home. And for the first time, Leo didn't feel like they were completely alone. The sunflower changed things. It was as if its bright, open face had punched a tiny hole in the quiet, gray world that Sam and his father lived in. It sat on their kitchen table, turning slowly to follow the sun each day, a silent guest that demanded no conversation but seemed to watch over them. Leo found himself looking forward to the trips to the garden. It wasn't about the gardening, which he was still terrible at. It was about what happened there. The woman, whose name he still didn't know, began a new, quiet ritual. She would leave small things by the gap in the fence. One day, it was a smooth, striped river stone. Another day, a feather from a blue jay, impossibly bright. She never spoke when she left them. She would simply appear, place the object on her side of the fence, catch Sam's eye with a gentle nod, and then go back to her work. Sam began to wait for her. He would stand by the fence, patient as a statue, until she appeared. He would take the offered treasure, examine it carefully, and then place it in the little cardboard box he now brought with him. Still, he did not speak. But his silence felt different now. It wasn't a wall. It was a kind of listening. One afternoon, the sky turned a dark, bruised gray halfway through their visit. Leo heard the low rumble of thunder in the distance. "Come on, Sam, we need to pack up. Rain's coming." He started hastily gathering his tools, his hands fumbling. A sudden, cold wind whipped through the garden, scattering leaves and making Sam squint. Leo turned to grab his bag, and his foot caught on the handle of the rake he'd left on the ground. He stumbled forward, trying to catch himself, and his elbow slammed hard into the corner of the garden plot's wooden frame. A sharp, hot pain shot up his arm, and he let out a grunt, dropping to one knee. Ah, perfect. He muttered through gritted teeth, cradling his throbbing elbow. That's when the rain started. Not a gentle sprinkle, but a sudden, heavy downpour that soaked through his shirt in seconds. He pushed his wet hair out of his eyes, looking for Sam. His son was standing a few feet away, his face pale, his eyes wide with a fear Leo hadn't seen in weeks. The thunder cracked again, louder this time, and Sam flinched, his hands coming up to cover his ears. The box of treasures fell to the muddy ground, spilling the stone and the feather. "Sam, it's okay. It's just rain," Leo called, struggling to get up, his elbow screaming in protest. He could see his son shutting down, retreating back into that terrified, silent place. The progress of weeks seemed to be washing away in the storm. Then he saw her. The woman came through the gate in her garden, not running, but moving with a swift purpose. She didn't look at Leo. She walked straight through the pouring rain to Sam, who was now trembling, his eyes squeezed shut. She carried a big, faded piece of canvas, like an old tablecloth. She didn't try to pick him up or yell over the storm. She simply opened the canvas and held it like a canopy over both of them, a small, dry shelter in the middle of the downpour. The drumming sound of the rain on the fabric changed, became softer. Sam peeked out from behind his hands. Leo watched, rain streaming down his face, pain forgotten. The woman knelt down in the mud, so she was at Sam's height. She was saying something to him, but Leo couldn't hear the words over the rain. Her voice was a calm murmur, a steady stream in the chaos. Then she held out her hand. It was rough and soil-stained, with small scratches and scars from her work. Sam stared at her open palm. He looked at the rain, at his fallen treasures in the mud, at his father still kneeling a few feet away. The thunder rolled again, but it sounded farther away now. Very slowly, Sam uncurled one of his own small hands from his ear. He hesitated, his lower lip trembling. Then he reached out and placed his muddy hand firmly into hers. It was a small, wet, muddy handshake. But to Leo, it was like seeing a miracle. It was the first time Sam had willingly reached out to another person since his mother had died. It wasn't a hug he was forced into, or a hand he was made to hold. It was a choice, a connection. The woman didn't make a big deal of it. She just closed her fingers gently around his, gave his hand one soft squeeze, and then, still holding the canvas over them, she led him toward the gate to her garden. She looked back at Leo, her eyes asking a clear question. Leo nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He grabbed their things and followed them through the gate and into the little lean-to shed at the side of her cottage. It was dry inside, smelling of earth, wood, and dried herbs. The rain hammered on the roof, but in here, it was peaceful. She let go of Sam's hand and busied herself finding an old towel for Leo to dry his face. She handed Sam a smaller, cleaner rag to wipe his hands. Sam looked around the shed, his eyes taking in the baskets of dried flowers, the jars of seeds, the rows of hand-painted plant pots. "Thank you," Leo finally managed to say, his voice rough. "I'm Leo, and this is Sam." The woman nodded. "I know," she said simply. "I'm Elara." She said her name like it was a fact, not an offering. She looked at Sam, who was now cautiously touching the edge of a basket. "You like the stones?" she asked him. Sam didn't answer with words, but he looked right at her, and he gave a single small, definite nod. Elara smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and made the lines on her face deepen into kind curves. "Good," she said. "I have more." Leo leaned against the workbench, watching his son in this strange, safe place. The pain in his elbow was a dull ache. The fear in his heart was quieting. He looked at Elara, really looked at her, seeing not the town story, but the person who had just walked into a storm to offer a scared boy a dry hand to hold. In that moment, the wall the town had built around her, and the wall of silence Sam had built around himself, didn't seem so strong anymore. Something had been planted today, something that had nothing to do with seeds and everything to do with a simple, rain-soaked act of kindness. The world outside Elara's little shed was washed clean by the rain. For Leo, something inside him felt washed clean too. The simple act of telling her his name and hearing hers in return had broken a spell. She was no longer that woman. She was Elara, and she was the person who had known exactly what his son needed in a storm. The visits to the garden plot became visits to Elara's garden. Leo would work on his side of the fence for a little while, but it was just a formality. Sam would quickly disappear through the gap, and Leo would soon follow, sitting on the old wooden bench near her cottage, with a cup of the mint tea she always offered. He didn't talk much either, at first. He just watched. He watched Elara teach his son without using words. She would point to a plant and to a picture in a worn-out book, letting Sam make the connection. She showed him how to press a seed into the soil with his thumb, and how to water gently at the base, not on the leaves. Sam listened with a focus he never showed anywhere else. He began to help with small tasks, carrying the watering can, holding a basket for weeds. His face, so often blank, would light up with quiet concentration. One afternoon, Leo finally broke the comfortable silence between them. "He doesn't talk to anyone else," he said, his eyes on Sam, who was carefully deadheading marigolds. "Not a word for almost a year." Elara sat beside him, wiping her hands on her trousers. "Maybe he has nothing to say to them yet," she said, her voice thoughtful. "Or maybe they're not listening the right way." "He talks to you," Leo said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a wonder. She smiled a little. "No, he doesn't. He communicates with me." "There's a difference." She nodded toward Sam. "Look." Sam had come over, holding something cupped carefully in his hands. He stood in front of Elara, opened his palms, and showed her a fat, perfectly round pea pod he'd picked. He looked from the pod to her face, his expression serious. "Ah," Elara said, nodding appreciatively. "A good one. For the soup." Sam gave a satisfied nod, then ran back to the pea plants to look for more. "He doesn't need words for that," she said to Leo. "He just needs to be seen." Leo felt a lump form in his throat. He realized that in all these months, people had seen Sam as a problem to be fixed. They saw his silence as a broken thing. Elara saw him as a whole person, just one who was communicating in a different language. This new understanding made what happened next so much harder to bear. It was a Saturday at the town's small hardware store. Leo was buying a new trowel, Sam at his side holding a packet of sunflower seeds Elara had given him. The owner, a friendly man who had always been kind, was making conversation. "Heard you're spending a lot of time out at the old community garden," the man said, ringing up the purchase. "Yeah," Leo said, putting a hand on Sam's shoulder. "It's been good for us. Nice to get some fresh air," the man agreed. Then he leaned in slightly, his voice dropping into a confidential tone. "Just, keep an eye on things, especially with the little one. Some folks out that way, well, they keep to themselves for a reason." Leo felt his body go still. "What do you mean?" The man looked uncomfortable, but pressed on, clearly thinking he was being helpful. "That Alara Moss, she's fine, I'm sure. But you know about all that. Business with the school funds. Never proven, but where there's smoke, just might not be the best influence. We gotta protect our kids." A hot, sharp anger rose in Leo's chest, so sudden it took his breath away. He saw Sam's head dip, the sunflower seeds clutched tighter in his small fist. He saw the man's face, not mean, but blindly repeating a story that had ruined a life. He thought of Alara's rough, gentle hands, her quiet patience, the safe space she had created for his son when no one else could. Leo's voice came out low and steady, but it carried a force that made the owner blink. "Alara Moss has shown my son more kindness than anyone in this town since his mother died," he said. "She is the best influence I can imagine. Whatever business you think you know about, you're wrong." He took his change, picked up the trowel, and guided Sam toward the door. He was shaking. He wasn't a confrontational man, but this felt like someone had tried to smother the first green shoot of hope he'd seen in a year. The incident lit a fire in him. He started asking quiet questions, not with anger, but with a dogged determination. He talked to retired teachers, to older members of the town council who had been around back then. He listened more than he spoke. The story he pieced together was not a story of theft, but of fear and a desperate desire to avoid scandal. There had been a shortfall in the accounts. The beloved elderly principal, now long past, had been overwhelmed and made errors. Alara, as treasurer, had been the easiest person to blame. A narrative was chosen to protect the school's reputation and the principal's legacy. It was easier to let one quiet woman carry the guilt than to tarnish a respected name. Leo knew what he had to do. It wasn't just for Alara anymore. It was for Sam, who had found his voice in her garden. It was for the truth. The next week, there was a small meeting at the town hall about the community garden's budget. Leo went, Sam holding his hand. When the mayor opened the floor for comments, Leo stood up. Every face turned to him, familiar, kind faces that had brought him casseroles. His heart pounded, but he thought of Sam's hand in Alara's in the rain. "I'm here to talk about influence," he began, his voice clear. "My son stopped speaking after his mother died. This town was kind to us, but it couldn't reach him." He looked down at Sam, then back at the crowd. A person who reached him was someone this town decided, a long time ago, not to see. Alara Moss. A ripple of uncomfortable shifting went through the room. Leo didn't back down. He told them what he'd learned, not as an attack, but as a sad story of a mistake that had been covered up with another, bigger mistake. "We blamed an innocent woman to protect a memory," he said. "And in doing so, we lost a wonderful teacher and a good neighbor. My son found her, and she is helping him find his way back to the world. That's the real story. The only influence she's had on my boy has been to teach him how to grow things and how to be brave again." He sat down. The room was utterly silent. Sam leaned against his arm. An elderly woman stood up, her face pale. It was the former school secretary. Her voice trembled. "He's right," she said, almost in a whisper. "It wasn't her. We were all so scared. We just let it happen." She began to cry, and the sound was more powerful than any shouted accusation. A dam of old whispers broke. The truth, once spoken aloud, couldn't be unheard. Leo saw shame on many faces, and dawning realization on others. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired and sad for all the wasted years. After the meeting, as they walked to the car, Sam tugged on his father's sleeve. Leo looked down. Sam held up the packet of sunflower seeds. Then he pointed down the road in the direction of Alara's cottage. His meaning was clear. Leo knelt down. "You want to go see her?" Sam nodded, his eyes earnest. In that moment, Leo knew the battle wasn't about winning in a town hall. It was about something much simpler. It was about going to tell a woman who had been living in winter for a decade that spring might finally be coming. And it was his son, still without words, who was leading the way. The days after the town hall meeting were quiet, but the air in Cedar Brook felt different. It was as if a heavy, dusty curtain had been pulled back, letting in a light that was uncomfortable but clean. People didn't know what to do with the truth. Some stopped Leo on the street to offer a mumbled apology. Others simply looked away, their faces tight with shame. Leo accepted the apologies with a quiet nod, but his focus wasn't on them anymore. It was on the two people waiting at the end of the gravel road. He and Sam went to Alara's garden almost every day now. It was their real home, more than the house full of memories ever felt. Leo had started fixing things for her. A wobbly step on the porch, a leaky faucet in the shed. He worked with the quiet contentment of a man who has found a purpose for his hands again. The town's official apology came in the form of a letter, delivered by the now former mayor. It was a stiff, formal thing, full of regret and a hope for reconciliation. Alara read it on her porch while Leo sanded a railing nearby. She finished it, folded it neatly, and set it aside on the small table. "Well," she said, looking out over her riot of flowers. "That's that then. Aren't you, I don't know, relieved?" Leo asked, pausing his work. She thought for a moment. "The truth is a relief. This," she tapped the letter, "this is just paper. The garden was my relief. This," she said, gesturing to where Sam was carefully painting a terracotta pot with blue paint. His tongue poked out in concentration. "This is my relief." Leo understood. The world could give you all the apologies it wanted, but what mattered was the life you built in the quiet moments. He saw the life they were building, the three of them. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was built on shared cups of tea, the smell of turned earth, and the silent, steady companionship between a woman and a boy who spoke a language of their own. The Community Garden Committee, eager to make amends, decided to have a grand reopening for the whole restored space. They asked, nervously, if Alara might like to have a stand for her seedlings. To everyone's surprise, including Leo's, she said yes. The plants shouldn't be hidden away, was all she said. The day of the opening was bright and sunny. The garden was full of people, the neat rows now lush and productive. There was laughter and the clink of lemonade glasses. Alara's stand was a burst of color at the far end, her unusual seedlings and cuttings drawing curious looks, and slowly, a few customers. She was polite but quiet, letting her plants do the talking. Leo stood with Sam near the center of the garden, where a small ribbon was about to be cut. He felt a nervous energy buzzing around them. It was all a bit too much. He looked down at Sam, worried the crowd would overwhelm him. His son was holding his hand, his eyes scanning the faces until they found Alara at her stand. He pointed. "Yeah, she's right there," Leo said softly. "You want to go see her?" Sam nodded. He led his father through the crowd, not roughly, but with a determined pull. They walked past the chatting neighbors, past the mayor preparing his speech, straight to the quiet corner where Ilara stood. She saw them coming and gave them her small, real smile. Sam let go of his father's hand and walked right up to her. He had something clutched in his other hand, the terracotta pot he'd painted, now with a single vibrant sunflower growing in it. He held it out to her, an offering. "Oh, Sam," she said, her voice warm. "You finished it. It's beautiful." She took the pot, her fingers brushing his dot, and then it happened. Sam reached out and took her free hand. He held it, just as he had in the ring. Then he tugged on it gently, wanting her to bend down. A flicker of confusion crossed her face, but she leaned down until her ear was close to his mouth. The mayor started his speech, thanking everyone for coming. The crowd's murmuring quieted. But Leo, standing 2 feet away, heard nothing but the beating of his own heart. He watched his son's lips move. He saw them form a single silent word. Ilara froze. Her eyes, which had been on the pot, went wide. She stayed perfectly still, bent over as if afraid to break a spell. Then, slowly, she straightened up. She looked at Sam, her gray eyes shining with unshed tears. She looked at Leo, and her expression was one of pure, astonished joy. She didn't repeat the word aloud. It was a secret gift, meant only for her. But Leo knew. He knew from the way her face transformed, from the way she brought Sam's small hand to her cheek. For just a second, the mayor finished his speech to a smattering of applause. People began to mingle again. But in their little corner, time stood still. Ilara finally found her voice, a husky whisper. "Would you too," she said, looking from Sam's hopeful face to Leo's, "like to come back to the cottage for some lunch?" "I made soup." Sam nodded immediately, vigorously. Leo felt a smile spread across his face, a real, easy smile that felt like using a forgotten muscle. "We'd love to," he said. They walked back together, away from the crowd, down the familiar gravel path. Sam walked in the middle, holding his father's hand with one of his, and reaching up to hold Ilara's with the other. He swung their arms gently as they walked. Leo didn't ask what Sam had said. He didn't need to. The word wasn't the point. The trust was. The voice was found. It would find more words in its own time. Later, as they sat at Ilara's small kitchen table, sunlight streaming in, eating pea soup from the pods Sam had helped pick, Leo looked around. He saw Sam's drawings pinned to her refrigerator. He saw his own repaired chair pushed in at the table. He saw a future, not as a replacement for the past, but as a new growth from it. It was fragile, and it was strong, like the seedling Sam had once carried so carefully. It was rooted in truth, watered with kindness, and now, finally, it was beginning to bloom. The widower, the son, and the woman everyone had shunned were no longer those people. They were just 3 souls, sitting in a patch of sunlight, listening to the comfortable silence that comes when you are, at long last, home.